good arrangement. Noyes always made certain that their assigned aircraft was in tip-top shape, and Brian always brought it back. And sometimes he shot down Germans with it. After he finished snapping into his parachute, Brian climbed onto the aircraft's left wing, slid past Noyes, stepped down into the cockpit, and strapped himself to the seat. Noyes pulled a rag from his pocket and wiped down the windscreen a final time. It couldn't be clean enough. Finished, he wished Brian happy hunting and returned to the ground, where he waited with his assistant crew chief and armorer. The weather at Bodney was gray but fresh on November 2nd, 1944. A cold breeze laced the bare-branched trees that lined much of the airfield's periphery, and sunlight pierced the clouds in bright, striated columns. Brian saw a puff of smoke from an aircraft across the field an instant before he heard the bark. Immediately, there was more smoke and a rising growl as the Packard-built Merlin engines of 54 blue-nosed P-51s spun to life. Brian finished his pre-start checklist and nodded at Noyes, who stood in front of the aircraft with the fire extinguisher. His eyes swept the cockpit once more before he primed the engine, and then he threw the start switch. The starter whined, and the four-bladed propeller in front of Brian ticked in circles for a few seconds. There was a sharp chuff, a clot of smoke, and flame from the exhaust stacks, and then a low roar as the engine caught and the propeller blades whirled into a translucent gray disk. Brian set the fuel mixture and throttle, glanced at his engine instruments, then nodded at Noyes. The crew chief ducked under the wing of the aircraft, staying well clear of the propeller, and tugged the wheel chocks free. Brian's armorer stood nearby, smiled, and raised a thumb. Earlier, he had loaded the aircraft's 6 machine guns with nearly 2,000 rounds of 50 caliber API, or armor-piercing incendiary, ammunition. The guns, their muzzles plugged with pressed cardboard discs that kept out dirt, water, and small critters, were ready for action. Already the group's fighters were moving toward the takeoff end of the field. Because they couldn't see directly to the front over the long noses of their aircraft, the pilots taxied in a series of small S-turns. The P-51s, so graceful in the air, resembled great waddling blue-nosed aluminum ducks on the ground. Brian eased off the brakes, advanced the throttle, and let Little 1-3 roll forward. He returned Noyes' thumbs up as he turned to join the rest of the group. Dirt, leaves, and bits of dry grass lifted from the ground by dozens of whirling propellers whipped past the fighters as they snaked their way into takeoff position. Brian heard a small tick as a pebble bounced off the right side of his fuselage. He mentally checked off the other 3 members of his flight, Yellow Flight, as they fell into position behind him. He checked his watch again as the 352nd's first 4 ship of P-51s raced down the grass field and lifted into the sky, exactly on time. The radio was silent, as it always was when the group went on a mission. Less than a minute later, Brian readjusted the silk scarf around his neck, completed his takeoff checklist, cranked his canopy forward, and locked it shut. The roar of engines was muffled to a dull thrum. When the flight in front of him started its takeoff roll, he felt the prop wash gently jostle his own aircraft. Immediately after, he edged forward, checked his instruments one more time, and then looked to his right as his wingman, element leader, and number 4 man lined up in a close echelon slightly behind him. With his flight in position, Brian pushed his throttle smoothly forward and released his brakes. At the same time, he instinctively stepped hard on the right rudder to counteract the tremendous torque generated by Little 1-3's powerful engine. The V-1650, a Packard-built derivative of the excellent Rolls-Royce Merlin, could quickly snap an aircraft out of control if not handled properly. The other 3 pilots of Yellow Flight rolled with him. Little 1-3 bumped along the grass, but the bumping grew less sharp as the trim little fighter accelerated toward flying speed. Brian's feet danced automatically on the rudders as he kept the aircraft tracking straight. A quick look over his right shoulder confirmed that the other 3 aircraft in the flight were maintaining their positions. A few seconds later, he nudged the control stick forward and felt the aircraft's tail lift clear of the ground. Immediately after, he lifted the fighter airborne and pulled the landing gear handle up. Brian quickly.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.